I have no idea whether it's working.
It's working.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the last day of TBRcon 2021. Little tear. But for those who may be joining for the first time this week, because that might be happening, my name is David Walters, and I run the book blog fanfightaddict.com. Before we really get into it, while this is a completely free convention, we do have 3 amazing charities we're raising donations for: Shelter, No Kid Hungry, and World Wildlife Fund. There are links provided below, but if they do decide to be a little temperamental, you can always go to fanfightaddict.com and click on the TBRcon21 link at the top of the page. Any and all donations are greatly appreciated. So we are here to talk this morning about gods, goddesses, demigods, and everything in between with my esteemed group of panelists and Michael Fletcher. But before the slaughter begins, I want my panelists to introduce themselves or one another, whichever pleases the gods the most, but I'll just have everybody introduce themselves. So Tom, we'll start with you.
Okay. I'm Tom Lloyd. I've done, 12 fantasy books now. First one was The Stormcaller, and I've just finished the series of God Fragments.
Michael?
Michael J. Sullivan. You can see it right there underneath my face. I've been published since about 2008. I've published 17 novels, otherwise known as Legends of the First Empire, Rhaenyra Revelations, Rhaenyra Chronicles, which came out through Orbit and Del Rey, one after the other. And I've been on the bestsellers list for New York Times, Washington Post, and USA Today.
Mm-hmm. All the things.
So glad I'm following that. The name says John Hollins. I'm not John Hollins. That's a lie. My name's Jonathan Wood, but I wrote the Dragon World series under the name John Hollins, 3 books out from Orbit, and before that, wrote the Hero series under my real name, which came out from Titan. They didn't make any bestseller lists. It was quite sad.
Dyrk.
I am Dyrk Ashton, author of the Paternus trilogy, and it's easy for me because that's all that I've written and have out. And I'm just realizing the last time I was on SteamYard, I must have been doing the 20-year anniversary thing for Night of the Living Dead 1990, because it still says Dyrk Ashton, aka Truck Zombie.
I was kind of wondering what the end of the tagline was. Justin?
I'm Justin Call. I've written The Silent Gods, but not all of the series yet. I've only written... my debut came out last year in America, last year. And my second book comes out in May, Master Artificer. Master of Sorrows was my debut. But that also came out in the UK 2 years ago, so it was a little off time. But it's a longer series. It's 4 books for the first series, and then it'll be probably 12 books before I'm done. But just get started. They're long.
You're heading for Michael J. Sullivan territory.
I'm sure he'll greet me warmly when I get there.
Jordan?
Hi, I'm Jordan Loyal Short. I'm the author of the Dreadbound Ode. It's a 3-book series. The first 2 books, The Scald's Black Verse and The Weeping Sigil, are out already, and Travels in the Dark should be out probably summer if I'm not lazy, or fall if I am. I guess leans towards fall in that case. But it's like epic grimdark fantasy with a little splash of space opera. So if you like a dark, might have some. Oh wait, you're behind me. I might have something dark for you also.
Fletch?
Hey, I'm Michael R. Fletcher. I don't actually write books. I just tell people that I've written other people's books. So I write all of Dyrk Ashton's books, Rob Hayes. I'm thinking maybe I've written Justin Call's books and Jordan's books and Tom's books. So I want to get to know you guys before I start claiming that I've written all your books. So we'll get there. End of the day. That's it.
Just want to make sure everybody's a good enough author for you to take credit for, right?
Oh, yeah. I don't want to bring your brand down, man.
So awesome. So I'm just going to kind of throw it out there for the first general topic. Who needs deities in fantasy? Am I right?
Who needs what?
They need deities in fantasy. Am I right?
Daisies?
Let me tell you about the Daisy God.
Fletcher
Okay,
puts,
tell us, John. Tell us about the Daisy
Fletcher
God.
puts daisies into all of his fantasy.
True.
I mean,
Beautiful daisies.
there are a lot of daisies in this.
Oh.
It's only one.
He'd know.
The author.
Who knew this would just be pumping up Michael J. Sullivan the whole time?
Well, you knew when you had this panel that when you said you're going to talk about gods and deities and demigods, it's us, right? I mean,
why else
our
would we do
gods
this?
of our
We'll
own
talk
world.
about ourselves the whole time.
You determine
You know-
who lives and dies.
I put you all on this panel thinking that Fletcher would only be doing that, but it's good to know that it's going to be all of you now. So thank you so much. But seriously, like, are there a requirement in fantasy? I mean, I feel like gods and religion all go together in fantasy. You see them sometimes in the forefront, sometimes in the background, maybe as more of like a puppet master type deal, or they're maybe just casually mentioned because they may, just be thought of as dead and gone, and people just reflect on the past. But why do you feel that gods serve such a purpose in fantasy? And anybody can take that.
Definitely give it oomph. If you want to write epic fantasy and you want the stakes to be high, have a couple of gods going at it. Impressions of that are get up and up.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mike.
Somebody go.
I was going to
We
say,
raise our hands.
I'll jump in and I'll be
Okay, go Justin.
I think that a lot of times, not always, but often, probably not even the majority of the time, but often, magic in fantasy comes from the gods, or that's the easy justification for it. But just as often it doesn't, and you can still have gods, but that interplay between where the magic comes from, or if you have gods in your world and you have magic, do those things counteract? Like, do you still believe in the gods when you're essentially a god yourself and you have magic? Like, answering those questions, I think, are at the heart of a lot of the reasons why we have deities in fantasy.
And also, there's all of us have done the minimal amount of research into history that we need to do this stuff. So we know that there's that. There was a time very recently when gods were like a huge deal. So if you're going to emulate that time, you do sort of have to figure out you almost need a reason to not bring them in if you for a little bit of the simulacra of historical accuracy.
Yeah, if it's a medieval era, you would expect there to be some kind of theology there.
Yeah, and it seems more inevitable when magic is involved. It feels more of a sort of natural extension of what you're doing, I find.
I tend to think that, if you're making a fantasy world, you're making a fantasy world. So you have to try and satisfy all those aspects that you'd find in the real world in order to make the fantasy world just as legitimate as a real one, and then get, that suspension of disbelief by giving you a sense that this is real. And I think everyone's got to have an economic system, an industry, a transportation system, government system, and usually religion is always considered to be part of general life. There's probably no community that's ever existed that hasn't had religion of some sort. So you introduce the gods. And also, if you're going to be making your own world, you get to, almost inevitably have to say the origin story of the world. And that usually involves gods or something of that nature. So I think that's kind of how you end up getting into this whole God thing. And you end up just kind of going off the deep end and just I'll just keep going with this until finally they become characters. And, it's because you're right. It's like fantasy. It's like, if you can make the gods, you can do whatever you want with them, right? So it's fantasy. Have fun with it.
It's all, for me, it just feels like it's all based in, the original stories, mythology, a lot of it just comes out. A lot of fantasy is just really a more modern telling of a mythology of some sort, and it, that pervades almost every level of fantasy and religion, of course, like Mike said. Ideas of faith and belief, and there are plenty of fantasies where people talk about gods and there are churches, but you never see one, and you never have any proof that there is one, that they ever really existed at all. and they have no power. If they do, they have no power or choose not to use it. And then other ones where you go straight myth and have, gods battling it out, so
Like your series.
yeah,
Like somebody in this panel series. I don't know who that would be.
This commentary endorsed by Dyrk Ashton. And he approves this comment.
I approve this panel.
Fletch, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I like using gods in stories because for me, it's the chance to sort of to pick at that. They're always intricately entwined in what's going on. You may not ever see them in some series, depending on what I'm doing, but it's a chance to sort of if you're sort of part of why you're writing is to examine, look at, play with, twist various parts of society, then you need all those parts in there, like Michael said. It's part of your world building. And I mean, for me, gotta love a good chance to attack organized religion.
I'm trying to think, you guys probably know better. I'm trying to think of a fantasy that's fantasy that doesn't have any mention of religion or deities or creation myth.
Actually, I was trying to think of any novel that's ever been written. I was trying to come up with
Yeah. I've read some fiction, some thrillers and such where
that doesn't allude to any concept of religion or
except that they curse. And of course that
go.
alludes to religion, right?
Right.
Damn it, we almost had one.
The only series I can think of is Adrian Tchaikovsky's The Shadows of the Apps, where it's a 10-book series, and I don't think there's even any mention of God.
Okay.
I don't think they even approach the creation myth side of things. There's historical things, and you have races saying we were as gods, but he deliberately he left the gods out, which I thought was fascinating. And actually it worked.
Yeah. No, I could see.
But it's the only one I've come across.
But I mean, and some have very little mention. I was trying to think of, it took me a while to come up with where it was in the First Law in Abercrombie's first trilogy. It took me a while, but there is mention of that war. The demons scorched the earth, and I think there were some gods involved as opposed to just big, powerful wizards, but I can't quite remember. It's been quite a few years since I read it.
I think Baez considers himself a god.
Yeah. I mean, he does, but and then there's the builder, and but I don't. That's not in a real kind of traditional sense, and even like the king, they don't talk about what church the king belongs to, or I don't think he has a big religious head on his high table or anything like that, which is kind of interesting.
Love everybody's just.
Well, it's Abercrombie, so we're all like,
yeah, right. Got a question. Have any of you created a mythology rooted in part in modern physics and/or science more generally?
The closest
a mythology or parts of it?
Stuff.
Either or.
No, I did. I mean, I go into some quantum mechanics and more philosophical ideas of physics when I talk about kind of how characters in my books operate. Though I don't know that I could say it's rooted in modern physics or science, though I did. That is kind of an undercurrent throughout that gets talked about on occasion.
Yeah, that's a tricky question, because when you say rooted in, you would think that it's not like your mythology is going to be dominated by physics or science, because it's still a mythology.
Magic, on the other hand.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Magic, so in my books, the magic is tied to the gods, but it's also tied to the elements, but I've tried to approach the elements from a non-traditional perspective where there's 3 elements instead of 4 or 5. And then there's a metaphysical side of each element, and then there's the physical side. And when I do that, I look at the magic from a scientific perspective. So the things that we are familiar with in our world in physics and science are aspects of that magic, but they're able to control it with magic and with art and with blessings from the gods and other things. But there's rules, very specific ones. But, we're breaking a lot of science rules by following the science rules with magic. So it's kind of contradictory.
Yeah, as soon as you have a dragon in the book, you've destroyed the rules of physics and biology already. So.
That we know of.
I play as much with what we don't know about physics, the universe, particles, and energy and stuff like that as what we do, which, gives freedom to say all kinds of crazy crap, which is really basically what all those books are. Crazy crap.
Crazy crap.
Yeah, for my second series, I did it as a straight fantasy world with a whole pantheon of gods. But while I was writing it, I thought I'm not actually going to go into the details of this. I'm not going to tell the readers this, but actually I thought of it as science-based. So you have gods in constellations above the sky, in the sky. And my approach was very much, these are orbiting space stations with some sort of AI mind, and it's left over from a previous civilization. So I never actually said that on the page, but I approached the book in that way, partly as a game with myself to see what it did differently. But then got stuck into the details of just people killing each other on the ground.
Nothing wrong with that.
Details too carefully.
So aside from the, as Dyrk calls them, daisies themselves, what religious organizational structures do you use?
I can jump in on that one. So I was raised by, there are 2 very, very, very religious missionaries now. Religion has always been a thing in my life. And so, like Fletcher, I'm away at organized religion in my own little way because I was raised by 2 people that just great people, but they're all about this one. And that's like a big theme in my writing, is how people have let ideas kind of run away. There's a main character in my book, traditions, they've been conquered, and their traditions and religion is so important. He wants to get that back so badly because that's his total framework, regaining this sort of lost thing. And he ends up sort of destroying the very things that he is trying to get back by fighting them so hard. He starts making these sacrifices against what ought to be his moral code. But once you have that certainty that what you're doing is righteous, all of these things become this little slippery slope where, well, I'm killing this person, but I'm killing this person. I want this thing that's good. So I can take this next little step in this direction. And then suddenly, there comes a point where you look around at what you've been doing and you realize totally out of touch with what you have always espoused, and you've gone down this. The things that I want to explore in my writing, because
that's how I ended up in advertising.
Anybody else?
I got, I think the most organized structure of religion in mine is the bad guys. Now, because of the nature of the book, almost all of the main characters, and there are a lot of them, were at one point in history and in their lives worshipped as gods, and in different cultures or times around the world as different gods. But since the story takes place today, they really just don't pay it much attention, religion. except for the bad guys, have some pretty devout followers, and there's actually a whole ceremony that takes place in the third book.
Very Lovecraftian of you.
I know it is interesting. Normally, when you come across organized religion in fantasy books, they are the bad guys. It's very. I can think of way more like organized religion bad guys than good guys.
Well, first of all, I want to give a shout out to Brian. I know Brian. He's
Hey, Brian.
a
I didn't even
author.
see that's his name down there.
Yeah.
This was his question.
But I mean, I did the same thing where I kind of reading, medieval or Western civilization history, and you have the whole Roman Catholic Church, which was, of course, kind of where you start with. But then I also wanted to balance that because I didn't want to I don't like anything in my stories being completely evil or completely good. So I always have to find another way of looking at it. So with mine, I have the church, which administers to all the people, which is more political. We also have like the monasteries, which is more personal, and they go off in their own little mountains retreats, and they don't actually talk to people. And they're more the positive aspect of religion as opposed to the negative. So you got to get both. And then, of course, you have cults, which just the crazy people, which obviously comprise the entirety of Dyrk's books. But, yeah. So, I mean, I just like making sure that I want to be able to say good and bad, unlike apparently Fletcher, who just wants to just rip them apart, which I love.
I mean, you got to say, like, cults are a lot of fun in fantasy books. When you get a really good cult that just takes some weird little aspect of superstition or something and just runs with it like 1,000 miles in the wrong direction, they're just creepy and kind of a delight to read.
Yeah, then you've got the chance to really go out there.
Just thought of something that would make an interesting concept, that if you actually had a cult in a book that's being manufactured by someone with a strong personality who's invented the whole thing, it's not real, totally made it up. They make up this religion about this god. Of course, in a fantasy, it turns out there really is a god and he's pissed. That would be interesting.
Next book. Anybody else?
Yeah, I've got a variety of organizations, religious organizations in my book. Again, because I have a variety of gods, and I have specific ideas about the personalities of those gods and the people that worship those gods and how they might approach worshiping him or her. So there's a lot of politics involved in elder gods and younger gods, and organized religion versus unorganized religion, and more faith-based stuff. And so I always try to, when I introduce those different organizational structures and the people within them, I try to get a diversity of opinions, experiences, characters, because there is a lot of hypocrisy in religion, but there's also a lot of people who are not hypocrites, who are trying to do good things, and sometimes they're frustrated by people within their own church, or people outside the church, or people in another church. You have a lot of these conflicts that arise, and I think it's important to see the good, as well as take the opportunity that you're reading a fantasy novel, so nobody's going to have a bias against your made-up religion that you're creating in theory.
Well, you'd be surprised.
You'll have that person always.
But it's a good opportunity to expose people to a variety of ideas and help them maybe consider things that they wouldn't ordinarily consider in the real world, which I think is helpful as a reader.
It's good that you want to expose people, because Fletcher just exposes himself.
True.
Why are we all picking on Fletcher?
He's Fletcher.
He brings it on himself.
The only reason I showed up, I actually had nothing to say. I'm just going to sit here and look cute.
Well, you do look cute.
You do.
At least one of us can do it,
He just came here for the potential to show off his book covers. That's all.
Yeah, look at that shit pimping it behind me. Subtle.
Mhm.
So subtle.
Looking good.
Next question. What is the most challenging part about writing gods, etc., and what are your favorite myths?
Oh.
That's like a tailor-made question for Dyrk.
Right?
I love all the myths. I mean, it's just it's funny. I love the Greek and the Norse, but man, a lot of the old Irish myths and legends are just crazy fun. And like the Mahabharata, the Hindu Mahabharata is just insanely huge, and just people pulling massive powers right out of their ass, almost literally. It's just amazing. The easiest part for me was that I was basing my characters on real things out of myth and legends and fables from all over the world. The hardest part was making them, it was important in mind to make them real, right? They had to be real people with serious power, but real people, and dealing with the idea of what would you be like and what would you think if you had lived for so long and seen so much, and basically couldn't come out in the open today anymore. So a lot of them are just like, I explain in there that a lot of them took their lives. Most of them are dead. They died in those massive wars that we read about in all our myths. And including Ragnarok, which according to my book already happened. So there's, it was making them, since the gods in mine are more our main characters throughout the whole book, it was making them human, not having them be too like flat and all powerful, you know.
You know, one of my favorite authors who uses deities in their novels. Sorry, guys, it's none of you. The first author I read, the first fantasy author, was David Eddings. It was the first book I read, and in his books, and he's got flaws in his books, as we all do, but the gods in his books are so much fun to read because there's like in the Sparhawk series, there's the Aline god who's like, it's almost like the Catholic God that's very like distant, and you never see them. There's no like interaction. It's kind of this abstract idea. But then there's the younger gods. So there's like 1,000 of them, and they're very personable. And it's a lot more like you would expect the Roman or the Roman gods to be when they were coming down and interacting with people. And so and some of them are playful, and some
interacting.
Right. So and having that difference, that variety, was really kind of eye-opening for me. And I like that because we have a lot of myths where gods are in them and they're interacting with people, but that's not something that we see very often in our regular world. I'm going to skip that word. It's too hard to say.
Easier to write.
But I like creating myths, though. Myths are super fun to create. I also borrow, but creating your own myths I've got a ton of them in my series. Love it.
Yeah, that's in one way, one of the challenging things is just knowing when to stop.
Yeah.
Because the story is basically or rarely about the gods themselves. Obviously, some people do it different and put them front and center. But most fantasy, it's about people. And so you can just fall down the rabbit hole of building this pantheon and the structure of the world and the myths. And then you find you're not, if you put it all in, the book's terrible. You have to then drag it out and pick and choose the pieces you're using. Otherwise, you've drowned the book.
Oh, almost, yeah. That reminds me, Tom. The hardest part was, and some people have even commented on this. Some readers, because a lot of these characters are pretty darn close to ultimately OP, right? They just. So how can you feel danger for them, and and how much power do I give them? Can they just go like this and create a world or explode a world? No, they can't. Well, not the ones in the main part of the story anyway. But there are some other ones that are introduced in the third book very briefly, but that's another thing. So yeah, it was how do I make the rules of what they can and can't do what can and can't kill them or harm them, and then sticking with those rules. How big should I make it? How small should I make it? In fact, after writing the first book, in one of the rewrites, I actually said, this isn't big enough. There's not enough. So I upped the ante a couple of notches of what they could do. And a lot of it is what the way I tried to put weakness is mental, right? Psychological vulnerabilities. So, and those can be played on in even the most powerful of the characters.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing when he broke off, is the fact that, setting limitations. It's like building, any, like even a magic system. You have to have limitations, things that if you do this, it causes that to happen, and that's bad, and this is good. And trying to figure out, particularly if you have, a really hierarchy of gods where you have the really big ones and then you have the smaller ones. It's like, what's the difference? How is this person big? Do they even have a corporal entity? Do they have physical bodies? Do they live forever? Obviously with Dyrk, some of his die, but I mean, most people accept the concept that if you're a god, you
Spoiler.
don't die. So I mean, you're generally considered immortal through most mythology. So it's like, can they die? How do they die? What happens if they do die? Because if you look through a lot of different mythologies, you find that there's gods of things. If you're a god of love and you die, is there no more love? I mean, these are questions you have to answer, because it almost becomes philosophical after a while.
Right.
So the ramifications of stating that they have this power and what happens if that disappears, that has repercussions throughout the whole story. So things you have to think about when you're doing it. So yeah, the limitations and the power level is probably what I would say is the hardest part of it.
Agreed.
Yeah, one.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, the other, dealing with gods and then mortals as well, is like how you sort of balance those power levels. Like, because a god is always going to be, definitionally a god is like the power level. So trying to make it then not become a horror story of like, like the little guy versus like the giant unkillable monster is like finding the sort of like the chink in the armor in that case for like the little guy to have a chance is also tricky.
One thing what I was going to say was kind of defining the balance between the mythos that's defined in your world and the reality of that story is, I think, one thing really a challenge for me. My book, The Dreadbound Ode, the gods are actually like the last members of a almost extinct alien species that rules over like solar humanity, sort of the successor to their civilization, and they've created this mythos around themselves. But part of the mystery of the story is kind of teasing out like what really happened in this, long dead story of the destruction of this ancient civilization. And a lot of the bigger themes in the story is this clash between the surviving members of that race, and you are trying to understand like why they've done the things that they've done and what the real basis of this is. I think that's kind of an interesting thing. When you have gods in the story, you can have this myth where person A is the good guy and person B is the bad guy, and everyone accepts this because it's part of your story, your culture story. And then all of a sudden, in a narrative, when you start really tunneling in what happened, all of a sudden you start to discover there's more to the story than first. We've been led to believe. That's a really interesting dynamic before.
That's literally the plot of my series.
Oh,
Well, because my protagonist is a reincarnated god.
can I interest you in this?
But he's raised by people who are from the opposite religion, so he has to reconcile who he is with what they tell him about who he is. So,
Let me intrigued.
likewise.
What about you, Fletcher? You're so quiet.
What? Oh, sorry. Zoned out.
That surprised me.
He just freezes his screen on purpose, and then
No,
he can take a nap.
Fletcher has one of the most amazing ways that gods are created in Beyond Redemption. Just kind of blew me away.
That was fun. That's basically the gods are, let's say, for the most part, ascended mortals, which is if you get enough people, it's manifest delusions, insanity shapes reality. If enough people believe that you are a god, you become a god. And so you can create gods, but your gods are shaped by those beliefs. So it kind of depends on what the populace believes about their god. So the common people have power. They can actually get their shit together enough to use it. The gods tend to be crazy. I have noticed I tend to treat gods in, I think, probably every single book or series kind of like parasites. In that they get more out of the relationship than the people worshiping them do. But that's maybe sort of more of a me issue than anything else.
Yeah, if you're not going to work your issues out in public on the page, why are you doing this?
Exactly.
Well, yeah, until I started writing, I didn't realise how much of a problem I had with organised religion. And then I started putting in all these militant factions. Went, oh yeah, maybe I do. They're not nice people.
I think that Fletcher has completely reduced religion down to the cult of celebrity. Very good.
Oh my gosh, you got to clap. But yes, no, I agree. Fletcher's gods and Beyond Redemption are some of the most interesting ones I think I've ever read. And that was kind of like my introduction to like grimdark. Was reading that novel. And I still think it's one of the most underrated fantasy novels out there. So
Agreed.
I'm just gonna throw that out there. I'm not just going to sit here and
Agreed.
piggyback on you, but it's so good.
Well, he's also got one of the few books I've ever read, maybe the only one where they talk about the afterlife right throughout, and we never really get to see that, except I think maybe in one of Mike's books at the end of one of his series. But in Mike's book, they actually go there.
Oh yeah,
they die, or in Fletcher's too. They actually in yours they actually go there. In his, there are some characters that actually die and wake up, and they are in the afterlife, and the story continues.
Yeah,
which was awesome.
Absolutely. There's Justin. He came back in. Lost you there for a second, Justin.
I know. I thought everybody else had lost connection.
You know what? He died. How was it?
Oh, and he came back in the after. This is guess what? Surprise! This is the afterlife.
It's just this.
Bad news about
You went to the wrong place.
This panel will just continue.
There are worse afterlives, I think. This would be a comfortable one for me.
So fan of the show Brian has another question. How hard do you find it to walk the tightrope between shining a light on negative aspects of religion and portraying it as a collection of real people with honest beliefs?
I just didn't get into it. It just wasn't something that I got into, and I don't really. Maybe by ignoring it, I did say something not very nice, but I didn't really mean to. They just don't talk about it much. The influences that they've had on religions all over the world and belief systems all over the world. Some of them were good most all the time. Some of them were bad most all the time, the characters, but I just don't really, I don't talk it up or trash it too much. I don't think. I hadn't really thought about that. It's a good question.
Yeah, I've never written that much about organized religion, but I feel like, if you focus on the individuals, because any organization is really just a collection of individuals. So if you focus on the individuals and just try and keep characters real and balanced, and don't portray someone as all bad or all good, then the picture of the organization sort of develops around that a little bit. Obviously, organizational structures matter and have an influence, but I think I don't know, I'm just talking about my own biases, but if you focus on the individuals, then I think that's probably gonna help you navigate that path.
Yeah, I mean, I found certainly in the Twilight Reign, I had a very sort of split up structure of the religion. And because the gods are there and they're sort of perfectly willing to get involved and go and smite people as necessary, it's not. It's a, you've got the sort of the beliefs of the gods, and that translates down into almost religious beliefs. But it's a basis that they've been given. It's not people interpreting religious texts to their own means. So generally, the people who are ministering to the poor or whatever are just trying to improve the community in a religious sort of function. They're the ones who are just good people doing good works. And it's when the religion gets bound up in politics or military, that's where the monsters come out, and that's sort of where the monsters gravitate to. But it's separate from the gods themselves and the actual religion. It's just using this power structure for their own means.
Yeah, I kind of handle it by taking faith out of the equation. I mean, if the gods are real and occasionally manifest and just horrendously destroy shit, it's not a belief system at that point.
Yeah.
There are gods. So now you've just got people, and like John said, some people are good, some people are kind of shitty, and it's a focus on individual characters. And you know, I tend to approach stuff where everyone's trying to do their best, trying to achieve something, and then they're just conflicting. You know, there's conflict with other people trying to do other stuff, but everyone's sort of working towards something, has a goal that they think is right or justified. But yeah, I carve the idea of faith out of it by making the gods real. So it's not a question of, oh, do I believe them? It's like, yeah, fuck, he's right there.
Yeah, no,
Why has he got a big stick?
it's funny. Like it's been a while since I read the Dragon Lords, and now I'm thinking back, like that was a huge part of it, because as soon as the gods are real, it's not religion as we have here. Like it's a different beast. It's like, you know, it's a matter of survival. Like there's a giant dude who can, like, if I put them off, like things are going to be real bad. Like it becomes a much more that cult of celebrity, transactional sort of like, please don't step on me sort of nature side of religion just like immediately springs forward.
You know, I don't think I do. I don't use those tactics in my books. I tackle it head on, in that, like, my series is called The Silent Gods, and the idea is there are gods, at least there were, but they've disappeared, and they've either stopped talking to people, or they're dead, or they've gone somewhere else, and people don't know why, and people are trying to make their way through and muddle through without the influence of their gods. And they have stories and mythologies about the gods working with people and doing good things, and some doing bad things. But now the gods are gone, and so they're trying to figure themselves out. And they're not totally gone, though. They're still there. Some are unable to talk with people. Some refuse to talk with people. Some are supposedly dead. And so all of these things influence people's opinions, how they approach religion. And even then, you get people who, how you just, as a person, as an individual, how you approach religion. Some people, they're very focused on rituals, ordinances, rules. And that is a cultural part of their religion. That is something that helps them identify who they are. And other people, it's a lot more spiritual, and it's a lot less about the rules. And there's a 1,000 different religions that people could subscribe to, and representing that and the different people that belong to those religions, how there's sometimes wicked people and good people in the same religion, that's really difficult to do well. But if you do, then you can avoid stereotypes. And I think I try to do that in my books, because I think that's accurate and reflects the world that I'm familiar with.
Yeah, it just kind of occurred to me. I didn't even realize that I was doing it, but a lot of the way I talk about religion, belief systems, creation myth, afterlife, stuff like that is by having the characters talk about what they believe. And they don't all believe the same thing, oddly enough, or at least not to an extent as far as like the one main most powerful character thinks that fate is a ridiculous lie and happenstance, whereas others of his children don't. They believe in such things, and some seem to know more than others, but none of them claim to be, none of them are an all-knowing, all-powerful God, creator God.
I just want to point something out that I think everyone's kind of missed here is the fact that why is it that Brian seems to think that we would ever want to actually shine as specialist religions and show real people and honest beliefs? Maybe we really just want to trash religion in general and anyone believes it. I mean, it's sort of a predetermined question. I mean, if I was, writing 1984, maybe I would be going against this. I don't know. It's a different way of looking at it, but it's just interesting that was the presumption that every author would want to do that.
Yeah.
Now, in response to how to do it, I mean, it's very simple. I mean, it's the same way you do government. It's the same way you do commerce. It's the same way you do violence. It's good. It's bad. You can't have it be one way or the other. So it's no different than anything else. I don't find it hard to do at all because, I mean, everything's that way. Everything is addressed in the same fashion. But it's just interesting that you assume that, no, you have to have a balanced address. Why? Why would you? I mean, you wouldn't answer the same question about government or about the use of violence necessarily. Maybe that's what you want to do. I think
maybe he's poking us.
Maybe. And thank God none of us are Joe Abercrombie. But.
I don't know. I'd kind of like to be Joe Abercrombie. I'd like to be able to write like Joe Abercrombie.
One day.
Your chair, Dyrk. I feel like you're like some sort of some cosmic overlord with that chair. Looking at it, it's amazing. It's like this all your own.
This is relatively new. I absolutely love this thing. See you guys later.
Got another question. When creating your own deities or gods, how much do you write about their histories or backstories first, or do you start with the general notes and develop as the story develops?
I go two ways. I either have no backstory whatsoever, and I just come up with it as I'm going, as it's needed to serve the story, or I'm riffing on or ripping off or stealing something from an actual religion, like the City of Sacrifice series. That's totally Aztec, and so I just make use of all the history, all of their religion, all of their gods. It's fantastic. They've got
crazy fun mythology there too.
Gods.
Crazy fun.
Flayed One, the Obsidian Lord, her skirt is stars. Like those are great names. So I just steal shit.
I have hundreds of pages of notes because a lot of
you did real research on actual gods, though.
Yeah, but I like it.
I know. None of us do. You're just weird,
I do too, Dyrk.
The most The most fun part though was there's all these gods and a lot of the stuff with the original idea was that so many of these myths are and particular stories are so incredibly similar to be nearly impossible to have developed completely separate from incredibly diverse, far away parts of the world. And these things are old, way old. I'm talking about way before flood myths and stuff like that. So it's, but the fun part was like, oh, this character is just like this character. So why don't I make this being in my story? He was both, right? So I do a lot of that. So making those connections was a lot of note taking. Yes, a lot of writing of backstory and how things worked and why this person could have been doing that in this time, and then do it with this other character while this other stuff could have been happening at another time.
Dyrk was always that kid in school we all hated because he was always doing his homework.
I did a lot of homework. I
would let you do my homework, Dyrk.
Except for math. Math, yeah, no. I would.
Yeah, my characters have exactly as much backstory as the plot requires. Figure out plot, figure out how much backstory is required to make the plot sound reasonable. That's exactly the quantity that they're going to get. Which gets me into book 2 every time.
See, that's because you're smart. Because there's probably, I would bet 100% of my notes and those backstories and all that, about 3% actually makes it into the books. But at least I know it, right?
Yeah. I'm on the other end of the spectrum. I spent like 15 years working on my series before I published my first book.
And it was dead silent.
Good man. No, mine wasn't 15, but it was It took me 4.5 years to develop and write the first book. So
I was just taking my sweet time, and I was having a lot of fun doing it. And then I got to the point where I was like, oh, I guess I got to write the book now. I did, but now I have all this approach. Yeah, I did. I really did.
Yeah, I think my last series I managed to I pretty much structured the sort of the plot and the world building from the basis of I don't like doing research. That then dropped me down a massive rabbit hole simply because I couldn't be bothered to actually read up on guns. I thought that sounded boring. So I then started playing around and ended up creating the religion, creating the major thrust of the plot as a result of that. Spent far more time on it than I would if I just actually sat down and read about how the plot work. So that'll teach me. But yeah, that one it was an ongoing process. But I had to do a lot more of it at the start than I was expecting because it produced so much of the book. Whereas previously I'd very much here's the bare bones, and the first series I learned to write while writing it. So I was going back and revising, so I could then just add pieces on the bare bones over years and years.
Yeah, my research was I took some classics courses in university and then just based the whole thing on some half-remembered Aristophanes plays, which is why my deities are mostly just turning into animals and trying to have sex with them.
You have interesting books.
Goodreads disagrees with you, but you know.
Mine, I created a church, so if I had a church, I had to have gods. I mean, it's kind of prerequisite, so you made them, and then as the story went on, I'm like, okay, well, I everything with my world is like as I need it, I create it, and that's find a way to make it make sense. Of course, that's always the fun part. That's like the puzzle you put together. And then of course, as Dyrk mentioned in one of my books, they actually go in the underworld and they meet the gods. So it's like, oh well, crap! Now I got to make them into real people, and that's always fun. But yeah, I mean, it's a evolutionary thing rather than I plotted it out in advance, and I didn't do that.
Spent 15 years on it.
Yeah, sometimes you just need to add bits on. For Twilight Reign, I was three books in, and I had a lot of the gods already. And then I wanted to go into the underworld, and so my editor said, "Right, this is the book you need to read before you write the book." And so I had to literally go and read the history of hell to plot out the first sort of 6 chapters of book 4, which was a very weird situation. I feel like I have to go back to school before I can actually learn work out how to write the book.
Well, it's an interesting thing I thought of because all of you understand the difference between a discovery writer and an outliner. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that you also do world building in the same fashion. Some people do it discovery, some people do it outline. Obviously, Justin is clearly an outliner, and I'm more of a discovery when it comes to world building. I mean, I build it as I go, as it's needed, and therefore it grows kind of organically, as opposed to having it. Because I know there are some people out there who have done these detailed maps in advance before writing their books, and oh crap, I need the characters to go from here to here, but there's a freaking canyon between them. I'm screwed. It's like, so, I mean, I avoid that for the most part until, of course, I nail everything down. And then I'm like, okay, I've been writing these books too long. A lot of times start a new world. Yeah, that kind of thing. But it goes, you can go both ways. Go ahead.
But it goes the other way, too, because sometimes when I'm writing and I'm like, okay, I need my characters to move or travel, I don't have to think about this. I can pull out the map and go, oh, they're going to encounter these things along the way. And so I just put them in.
Yeah, so if you have that's the benefit of both discovery and outline. I don't think anyone's either one or the other. They're all kind of on the sliding scale, and you change probably with each book you do. It's like, oh, this time I'm gonna be a little more discovery, this time I'm gonna be a little more outlining. See how that works, And I found that with a lot of writers, I'll switch it up to see what I was always an outliner. Now I think I'm a great discovery writer, and vice versa. So I mean, there's always benefits and negatives, but it's just interesting that is another aspect to writing. That just world building is another form of discovery versus outlining in a way.
What is the software that you use, Mike?
For what? My
for
God
writing.
building? As gods are us?
No, for writing. Your writing software.
Oh, Scrivener.
Yeah, you use Scrivener.
I use Scrivener.
I have actually seen Mike's Scrivener, and he talks about not taking notes, but he does. He's taken them along the way.
Yes.
And you should see what he's got on either side that scrolls for miles and miles and miles.
Well,
and all three to go on. He's got more notes than I ever wrote. It's just he's done it as
I have a file that all they do is throw out the manuscript, and all the research is still there. So he's building with each book.
Mhm.
So essentially, it becomes this giant Bible eventually. But,
Yep.
yeah.
It is huge. You should one day you should just have a Kickstarter and turn that into a book. I'm not kidding.
The problem is when I try and close that application, it takes 10 minutes.
I believe it.
I bet.
It is. I tried moving it onto a backup, and the thing is several, I don't know what's above a gigabyte.
It's terabyte.
Yeah, it gets huge. So, I mean, and I've got images and everything in it, so it gets
Oh yeah. It's all kinds of.
And we're
it's
totally off topic because,
I mean, I told you this was going to happen. I mean, it's just kind of. I mean, do any of y'all? I mean, I know. Some of y'all have stated that you've had to kind of go back and do research and so forth. Do you ever finish writing? Say you just kind of pants the whole thing. Do you ever just have to end up going in and backdooring something in, like a god that you just decided to throw in there, or you go, oh gosh, I have to have something for this to make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Once I plotted out books 2 and 3 of Dragon Lords, I had to go back and do a whole bunch of setup for because there's a reveal in book 2, which was in no way set up in book 1. I was like, oh crap! So we were in edits while I was starting we're in edits on book 1 while I was sort of plotting out book 2. And I was like, okay. So yeah, that was I definitely had to go back and retroactively fit some of the stuff in there.
For me, I would say no, but also caveat, because I've already written everything for my outlines. I don't have to backdoor stuff. The problem is when as I'm writing, there will be characters and things that occur that I did not plan to put into the outline. So then I have to go back and retroactively put those things into my outline and modify the outline I've created.
Yeah, I do a lot of stop and re-outlining.
Yeah,
that happens.
That's what all this is back here. All these.
Yeah.
Oh really? I thought that was how you were going to kill someone. It looks like
I didn't know you could actually see the writing on it, Mike.
Wait a minute, is that Fletcher's name?
The next thing you know is he's gonna have the red strings crisscrossing everywhere on the next panel. Question from Ollie, friend of the show. What are the differences in writing about Mesoamerican and South American gods, goddesses, and belief systems versus the more commonly written about European gods?
This is assuming that you're writing about gods.
Yeah.
I only know about one of them.
The hardest thing is, I think that there are certain things that people already have preconceived notions and knowledge about when you're writing about Greek gods and Norse gods, right? Most people that read fantasy, that want to read this kind of stuff, have a decent knowledge or at least background in varying levels of those. So when it comes to the mythology is lesser known in the West, you have to they're introduced as either brand new characters, almost like they're made up, in actually made up fantasy gods, but you want to try to tie it so that people know that. The hard part that was hard for me was discussing these characters in a way and talking about them, describing them in a way that could kind of get people up to speed a little bit, while also paying homage and having respect for where it comes from and letting people know where it comes from. So that's the big difference for me between writing about the two.
Well, yeah, imagine trying to tell someone about Christianity who doesn't know anything at all about it. I mean, there's a lot of backstory there. You don't want to waste everyone's time with all right, this book first.
Yeah.
What was that bit with the donkey? What happened there?
Yeah, who begat who?
Yeah.
When I look at the deities in my books, because I don't have a specific culture that I pull from, but I usually take 2 or 3 cultures and aspects of how they approach theology in those cultures, and I blend those together as inspiration for the mythology I've already created. So I have South American inspired gods, Mesoamerican gods and goddesses, but I also have the European gods and a variety of other cultures. But my hope is not to create something people say, I know where this comes from, but say this feels like something familiar. This resonates with something I've seen before, and therefore feels real to me. But it's not. It doesn't feel like you're culturally appropriating someone else's religion either, because then you can't be accused of, knocking their religion. You're saying, no, this is completely different. It's inspired by a variety of things. It's a mesh of things.
Asterisk inspired by.
Right.
I just blatantly culturally appropriate, and I absolutely do not give a fuck. There's a reason all my Mesoamerican gods are called their actual names. Now, I use translations rather than Quetzalcoatl kind of thing. It'll be, the Feathered Lord or whatever the hell it is. But that's
You're right. There's not a lot of,
A feathered serpent.
Yeah, Feathered Serpent.
I just want to say, God bless your sensitivity readers.
I actually don't use them.
He uses insensitivity.
I'm like,
Yes, he does. He really does.
I honestly, I don't think books should be so fucking safe. And if you want to be upset by something I write, then that's your choice.
Go read someone else.
It's not my fucking problem. I'm going to tell the stories I want to tell.
Can we
and if you
say
don't
that
like
on live TV?
it,
He being
read
bleeped.
somebody else's books.
David cut like 30 seconds ago. So.
Probably wise.
I actually muted him. He just can't tell.
It would have made
just
sense.
act
How little
shocked when
trouble I
told.
get in for this shit. But anyway, I totally lost where I probably wasn't going anywhere.
It's all right. It's every time you said a bad word, there's this little animated graphic that comes up and goes bleep right across your mouth.
There's just chicken every time. Like, no, I mean, I will say though, I mean, I'm a Christian and I can suspend belief when I read fantasy. I am one of Fletcher's beta readers. I mean, if that makes you feel, it's just one of those things where like, I know how Fletcher's going to write a novel. So I just expect the worst, to be honest. But I mean, I've read every novel he's ever written and I'm just like, kind of at the end. But, it's just one of those things. If you're going to upset somebody, I mean, they probably shouldn't be reading fantasy, right? Because I mean, there's a lot of upsetting things in fantasy for a religious type, and you just have to not be so dadgum sensitive.
And then at that point, the entire presentation shifted from deities to training for authors.
So gotta go, guys. Sorry.
But no, yeah, it's just interesting. But yeah, no, Fletcher, I didn't bleep you. I felt like I needed to let you talk a little bit. You've been so quiet. You've been sleeping the whole time. So
It's the hangover.
Actually, he's been talking the whole time. You've just been cutting his mic.
Another question from Paul. Do you have a personal favorite deity or god that you created or one from another author's book?
I don't know. Can we go with Morgoth or Saran? I mean,
Yeah.
That's
I mean, for my own book, my protagonist is my favorite, but that's why he's the protagonist. But David Eddings in his Sparhawk series, the goddess Ephrael, it's like the child goddess. I really liked that character in that series. It was very fun to read her appearances in the books. And when I find characters like that from other authors' books, I like to have an homage, if I can, in my own series that isn't stealing, but it's a nod to the people who say, this person influenced me, this person inspired me. I remember reading this and enjoying it. I want to share it with you. So,
Has anybody read Ed McDonald's Ravencry series?
loved it.
The Nameless
Loved it,
and
yeah.
I can't the Deep Kings.
Yeah.
There's like two sort of like pantheons. They're really
They're not gods, but they kind of are.
Yeah, they're like wizards that have become so powerful. They're like straddling the place between like arch wizards and demigods. They're really unique feeling and they're really well done. Great series.
Agreed.
I'd say I have to admit I still have a soft spot for Aslan. From reading Chronicles of Narnia as a kid, I guess.
I just wish the name would have been different because it sounds like you're saying something pornographic.
Aslan.
Hey, Aslan. I mean, it sounds like.
Jonathan, you got anything?
I'm racking my mind. It's funny. The one which immediately leapt to mind was actually the little Q from Star Trek Next Generation. I was actually like,
there you go. Yeah,
because he's a dick. Like,
All the best people are.
I mean, but anyway, but no. So yeah, which maybe probably tells you more about me than anything else. But yeah, and in my own work, I enjoyed writing fucking the God of Drunkenness because I mean, why wouldn't you?
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to actually pick out which ones really stood out for me. I love Stephen Erickson's gods, and so a figure like Anamander Rake just jumped out of the page straight off for me. But there's got different sort of levels of the gods in terms of who they are, but they all slightly miserable about how many years they're having to live through, how they're having to deal with all these things again and again.
I like the way Gaiman portrays Odin in American Gods. Is fun. He's fun.
Yeah.
Fletch.
I don't know. Right now, my favorite, I mean, just because I'm writing them, is Smoking Mirror, The Obsidian Lord. Because Obsidian plays a part in a couple of different series I have going, and there's some interconnection there I can't talk about. Just, it's a fascination. But that's Aztec stuff. Probably my favorite at the moment, but it's because it's on my brain.
Is that your Cosmere?
I think of it more as like a Michael Moorcock kind of thing. I haven't actually read Sanderson.
More like
I don't know what that is.
More like a pap smear.
More like a Eternal Champion, except the anti-hero.
That would be past Dyrk anymore.
That would make more sense if you've read some of Mike's books.
We're inches away from another Aslan joke. I know it.
Michael, any?
Oh, which one?
Gods.
You.
Favorite God.
He's Fletch. You're Michael.
He's Fletch. You're Michael.
So I was going to start this one with Morgoth and Tolkien stuff, but
Yeah.
I mean, you can also go with Lucifer. That's a good one.
I have a Lucifer.
I'm sure you do.
I have 2 kids.
Oh jeez. All right. All right. Last question I got for y'all.
Make it a good one.
Oh, thanks a lot.
No pressure.
No. On maybe we'll talk about on future books, but are you more keen to have deities at the forefront of your novels, or more of like kind of in the background, more of maybe a puppet master type, and why?
I think the OP problem, like when you have a character that can solve all of their problems with magic or the wave of a hand, it's hard to make their story feel like dangerous. It's got to all be emotional at that point, and which is possible, certainly. Dyrk is good at this kind of thing by now. How do you do that, Dyrk? How do you make someone who can clap their hands and make somebody go splat? They're in danger.
I do have characters that are kind of like that. A couple, anyway. How do I do it?
Yeah, it's like, that's a magic all of its own.
I guess I was daydreaming when he asked the question because I'm not sure how to answer it.
That's what happens with age, Dyrk.
Yeah. Who are you? What are you people doing in my room? It's hard. For me, it comes down to how powerful. They can't be too powerful, but you want them to be powerful enough that they're fun. And I do it because I love it in films and in books and in TV shows. I love to introduce a powerful character and suddenly they run into something that terrifies them, right? And then they run into something that terrifies them. And then they run into something that could totally kick their ass. And my books kind of progress that way as we go along. And hopefully people don't get tired of it. And you learn more of what each character can do and just how much they can do with it. They just haven't been challenged that much yet. And you also learn more of their weaknesses.
It'd be really cool if at the end of your book they literally run into Dyrk Ashton.
Well, they kind of do. He lives in the moon.
That makes sense.
Anybody else?
Yeah. When I approach my own fantasies, fantasy novels with the gods, when I start writing, it was at the core. Mythology, deity, that was like what I started with, as opposed to the story with the characters. And I took that mythology and then I kind of built the characters out of that. But when I'm writing my books, I do have like epigraphs that start part one with this reference to this epic thing that happened. So you get a little taste of that mythology, because to me it's very important, and to my story it's very important. It's essential. But that's not why you're reading the book, presumably. And most of the book doesn't have anything to do with that. It's all about the characters. So you don't see the gods. You get people's impressions of the gods, their thoughts about who the gods are or where they've gone. But all of this is conjecture, and all of this is it's a puzzle, right? This is one of the reasons why people read science fiction and fantasy, because they like putting together the puzzle of what this world is and who these people are, and you get one piece of information that contradicts another, and you have to hold these two contradictory ideas at the same time in your head until you get more information from the author or the story that helps reveal this person is mistaken, or both these things are true and this is why, and then you have this new revelation. And I think that's kind of the fun part of writing and reading fantasy. So I would say the gods are central to my story, but also they're completely in the background because everything's happening with the characters.
Yeah, I think I'd agree there. I generally keep them on the periphery because it's about the people, it's not about the gods. If the gods turn up on the page, they're quite often there as a roadblock because they have their own agenda, and it's something you've got to work around because they're gods. You can't plow on through them, apart from a handful of situations where exactly that. But mostly, they're part of the landscape you have to deal with. But if they're front and center too much, then it's not going to work.
Well, yeah, I think Dyrk brought it up earlier, is the concept of familiarity versus creativity. I mean, if you're going to have characters, then the gods are just setting. But if you're going to make your main character be a god, then you run into the immense problem of most people see gods as default of being A, immortal, and B, omniscient. Which, if that's your main character, you got a lot of problems. Unless, of course, they miraculously have amnesia. But, that's kind of a trope that's been carried a little bit too much. But, I mean, you have the familiarity of what you have to tell people. I mean, if you start with something that everyone knows about and understands, then you can get away with not having to explain too much, and you can get your story up and running quicker. Mm-hmm. But that also comes at an excuse, that limits your creativity to some degree. And it's like, well, how much do you want to be brand new that is totally on a planet where they breathe methane? Or do you want to be, something completely familiar that, everyone just is walking around in a subway and people can kind of relate to that. And then you can move on with the story. So there's a balance there that has to be struck. So I don't know. I'm just going to agree with everything Dyrk says. He's the God Master.
The God of gods.
Hardly.
John, Fletch, any thoughts?
No, I think Michael said it best. What Dyrk said.
You guys are only deferring to me because I have the biggest headphones.
That's the shirt.
I tried.
It's the chair as well.
It's clearly because you're the one. I said earlier, you did your homework and all of us didn't. So we're losing your paper. We're reading answers off of you.
I guess I've been pretty calm. It's going to depend on the story. like if I have an idea that I like which requires foregrounded gods, there's going to be foregrounded gods. If like otherwise, yeah, I don't have a strong bias, but my bias is towards story rather than to any particular aspect of whether religion or not is going to come in.
I mean, my characters are gods, so they have to be at the forefront. But the next project I'm going to work on, there's a religion and mythology of certain things, but I don't know that they'll ever manifest in any way, in any real way.
I think it's also worth looking at like Tolkien. We often call him the father of fantasy, whether or not you say that and believe that. But when you're looking at the Lord of the Rings, there's not a lot of gods in Lord of the Rings. It's in the Silmarillion, or it's like hinted at, and you don't really know, oh, this Balrog is actually this thing that came from this thing that was, these are related to deity. You don't really know that. It's just this monstrous demon thing, and you don't really know who Gandalf is or what his back, and it's not really important to the story that we're given, because it's about the characters and it's about the quests and it's about all those other things. And I think for the most part, we've sort of followed that trend in fantasy. There are exceptions, of course, with Dyrk being an exception. You've got gods who are very much in the scene and interacting with each other. But
I think you hit it on the head there. Dyrk is an exception.
An exceptional idiot.
And I like how we've now switched from Fletcher to Dyrk. You know, he's giving him a break.
This is why they say they're the same people, because they you can pick on either one. Just
exactly.
No, I
like headphones. They have similar headphones.
Yeah.
You can't tell them apart now. They're almost identical.
It's twinsies, yeah.
You just have to look for the shirt.
Talk whatever you want about me, as long as you're talking about me.
Well, awesome. Well, I want to take the last couple of minutes, and I want everybody to talk about what they've got going on right now, any new releases, recent releases, and then where everybody can start reading you that maybe hasn't read anything by you before. And Tom, we'll start with you.
Okay. I have just finished my series. So this is book one of the series. It's called The God Fragment, where there aren't technically any gods because they got broken up, and they are now useful for things instead. And the last book came out in August, so yeah, go check it out.
Awesome. Mike?
Oh, I'm up. Okay. I keep seeing. I don't know if your boxes are the same as my boxes. So yeah, I'm just finishing up the last book of a trilogy that's going to be basically the bridge between the last series and the first series I wrote. So those are going to begin with Nolan. I think the Kickstarter for that's starting this month. I'm pretty sure.
And that book is amazing.
You read it?
I got the beta read. Yes.
Oh.
You know I did. I loved it. There's a reason that Mike is successful as he is, and that's because he writes fucking great books.
Yeah, that'll be coming out I think this month, and then all of them again they're written. I'm just working on the very last part of the last one. That'll be, like I said, sometime this month, and I think it's coming out. Dyrk probably knows better than I do. I think it's coming out in like August.
Oh, I didn't know it was that soon. Awesome.
Oh yeah, I mean the Kickstarter's now, and then there's going to be something else, and then I think it's going to be coming out in August or something. I have no idea about my schedules.
Where's Robin?
I know she's the staff. She does everything, and I suggest that for all of you. All of you need to get yourself a really good woman who will do everything for you and just let you write.
Too late for that.
I've got Mike. Mike does that for me. Mike.
There you go.
I'm a really good woman.
You got to let her go now, though.
All right, John.
I was so prepared for this. I had to look up the cover of my book on my phone. So that's my book. There you go. But yeah, which if you're going to read Moon by John Holland, that's a good place to start because that's the first of the 3 books. So yeah, and I'm not talking about stuff I'm currently writing, so I can seem mysterious.
Oh, I like how when John talks about stuff that John Hollis is writing as if it's a completely different person.
I don't trust that guy. I don't trust him.
He takes the glasses off and he sounds different. Weird.
Yeah. He posts less. He does less shit posting on Facebook as well.
All right, Justin.
Yeah, my series is The Silent Gods. It's a tetralogy. The first book, Master of Sorrows, is already out, so folks should try and pick that up. And the second book, Master Artificer, comes out in May. And there'll be 2 more books, one every year. They're like, the second one's 900 pages almost, I think. The first one was like 600, so they're big books, and they'll probably stay that way because, like I said, I've got a lot of material, and I have to pull back and try not to put so much stuff in them. But
Awesome. Dyrk?
I wrote this stuff. Go read these. I do plan on continuing in this world. Like a series of 4 to 6 books takes place 20 years previously, more traditional type urban fantasy, Ronin type wizard hunter in the same world. But I think of it, I'm not sure it's a good blurb, but I think of it in terms of like Harry Dresden meets Jack Reacher, more in tone. And then I would like to do a trilogy that happens 15 to 16 years after this trilogy ends. But that's all going to be on break for a little bit. I have another Kickstarter coming up, starts March 9th, to do the 3rd book in the special edition, fancy special edition, limited edition hardbacks, which are pretty gorgeous, I have to say. March 9th, that starts, but the writing is mostly taking a break because I'm doing a contract project, putting together all the things that are selling so well on Amazon right now. I mean, it's going to be military magic school progression, cultivation, fantasy with dragon riders, except my main character is going to ride a kraken. So that's coming in 2022, the first book of the trilogy.
I love how subtle his writing is. It's it's just very quiet stories.
Hammer 'em.
Yeah, well, speaking of quiet stories, if you like, the world is ending kind of stuff, the series is the Dreadbound Ode. The Scald's Black Verse is the first book. I've only got the one series that I'm working on right now, so if you want to find a place to start with me, start right here. The second book just came out a couple months ago. That's The Weeping Sigil. And this series is like, grimdark fantasy with a little bit of space fantasy element in it.
So do you call that sci fantasy? Would you call it?
I've heard it called a lot of stuff. I kind of like the term, honestly, space opera, just because it meets the mood a little bit better, I think, than just like.
But that's already a word.
Fantasy.
That's already a word, and it already means.
I'm rebranding it.
Science fiction.
My thing.
Well, this is why I'm confused. He said space opera. It's like deities in space opera. This is please tell me more.
It's spice opera.
Yeah. See. Okay. I'm gonna write that down, and we're gonna run with that. You're my new PR guy, Dyrk. I like it.
David's up there shaking his head.
All right, we'll call it space fantasy. I think
Creating more confusing subgenres. That's what we're here for.
Spice opera. I'm going to call it that from now on.
Space fantasy with fat women.
Better than face opera.
Buy my books. And the third one, Travels in the Dark, is coming out in late summer or early fall.
All right, Fletch.
I am flaky, so I can't write one series. I've got 3 or 4. I don't even know how. 3 or 4 on the go. So City of Sacrifice series, there's 2 of those out. The third one might be by the end of the year. Second book in the Obsidian Path series comes out in April. I co-wrote a Russian low fantasy with Clayton Schneider, who is fucking insane. That guy's dark. Oh my god. So that's going to come out probably kind of spring, and I think we're writing another one. Those are standalones. And then at some point, so that people don't kill me, I should probably write the last Manifest Illusions book.
Yes, you should.
Yeah.
I think we've been telling you that for I don't know how many years now.
Just
do it.
I'll get there. Anyway, so yeah, in terms of what book to start with, whichever one kind of looks cool.
Beyond Redemption.
Beyond Redemption.
Start with it.
Okay.
And if you guys haven't read any of Clay Snyder's stuff, River of Thieves and Child of Nod are pretty brilliant.
Yeah, and Obsidian Psalm is.
I haven't read that. You read it?
Best
Yeah.
and Dyrk, yeah. Which is why I wanted to do a co-write with him with the Russian low fantasy idea I had.
And it's really good. I got to read that one a little early.
Someone
Nice.
violent, and it's that dude.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody that tuned in, and especially thank you to all my panelists who took the time out of the day to come just chat about everything around gods and goddesses and demigods and all that jazz. But really appreciate y'all coming on and chatting about it. And everyone that's tuning in right now, make sure you check out the live D&D session coming up in about 5 minutes. It's gonna be a lot of fun, and that'll be our last thing for TBRcon21. So thank you all who've been here the entire week, and we'll be doing this again next year. So
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Dave,
Thank you.
It's fun.